So let me guess, you've been scrolling through YouTube, looking through Ultimate Guitar, Reddit, or wherever you're looking for, and you're looking for a subject called Music Theory for Guitar, or Guitar Music Theory Lessons, or Music Theory, but specifically for guitar. This is a huge problem, and I'm going to break down a much better method to actually learning music theory, making it really easy, making it really simple, and especially not actually wasting your time, because looking through these kinds of videos, in my opinion, especially right when you start music theory, is a huge waste of time, and it's not actually worth going through. Let me explain. What's up, everybody? My name is Aiden. I'm a guitarist, guitar teacher, all that stuff that every other guitar player does. And in this video, I'm going to be mildly ranting and complaining, but more so giving you advice on what to do if you are at the beginner or intermediate stage of guitar, especially if you have no background on music theory. This is the video for you, because I'm going to break down one of the most flawed mistakes guitar players make when they start trying to learn the other side of guitar, which is the music theory aspect of guitar. Now, before we get into this, I just want to say I'm not saying that every music theory for guitar video is bad. I'm not saying that there's bad advice in there. I'm just saying that from a teacher's perspective, whenever people bring up these kinds of videos to me, it causes more confusion, it causes a lot more problems, and it never gets them to the actual destination that they're looking for, and I'll explain to you why. So let's think back when we first learned how to play guitar, and I mean the first 6 months of playing guitar, the first year of playing guitar. This was at a time where guitar was like a new language. It was like a new sport that you've never even seen before. You had to learn all the rules, you had to learn all the techniques, you had to learn all the shapes and all these things, and that in itself took time. Okay, if you're already past that in of itself, you know that the first year of playing guitar, some people would argue that that is the hardest, and it's a very valid argument. Okay, now let's talk about music theory and your first year of music theory. There's a reason why people say that music theory is like learning a second language. Okay, now if we think back to when we first started playing guitar, think to where you are now and to how you are trying to learn music theory. Okay, when you look at videos that say music theory for guitar, first of all, music theory works for every instrument, so there's that. And I know what they're trying to say is, oh, but I'm showing you the scales and how they work on the guitar, or I'm showing you the triads and how they work on the guitar. This is the first problem. When you show a guitar player something on the guitar, where do you think their face is? Where do you think their eyes are? They're not here looking, or they're not at the paper, they're here. Okay, this is something that I tell my students all the time when they're trying to memorize things, or they're not memorizing things, is they end up going like this and like this all the time, when then they never get anything done, right? So music theory, this is the very first problem with learning music theory for guitar, is when you give an intermediate guitar player or a beginner guitar player music theory for guitar exercises, it reverts them back into how they first started playing, where they're just learning how to play shapes, and they're just learning how to play scales, they're learning how to play triad shapes, but they're not actually internalizing the music theory that actually goes behind music theory. Okay, so you're not learning music theory from the standpoint of which it was supposed to be taught. Okay, now here's the thing. I understand it can be good to look at music theory on the fretboard, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't. You actually should. That's about 50% of what you should be doing, okay? But there's another huge chunk. Well, there's actually more chunks, maybe even less than 50% for your first year of it, but there's a lot that you're actually missing from music theory that most guitar players honestly fail and kind of mess up because they don't actually internalize the information. Take scales, for example, okay? Whenever I ask a student about scales, or even look at me back in the day, like if you talk to Aiden in early high school or middle school, and you're like, Aiden, do you know any music theory? Like, do you know about scales and stuff? I'm like, oh yeah, I know scales. And then I bust out the minor pentatonic scale, or I bust out like a major scale or something. Did I really know what the significance is of that major scale, or what the point of the minor pentatonic scale or what the difference is between a diatonic full scale, like a 7-note scale, versus a 5-note pentatonic scale? No, of course I didn't. Okay. Let's even take this as another example. How many people have met somebody who knows how to play the 5 pentatonic shapes, right? Some people you call that caged. You can kind of call it caged, but caged is mostly for learning triad shapes, okay? But I'm not a caged fan. You can watch my video if you care about my thoughts on caged. But whenever you'd meet these people, they wouldn't actually know what was going on in terms of the theory with it. And it kind of works the same way with modes. Guitar players, this is the biggest plague in guitar, is we're just memorizing positions and shapes, but we're not internalizing the theory. Now, let me stop you before you start, writing your comments. I'm a fan of teaching people shapes and memorizing shapes so that way they can move it to other keys, but they need to understand the music theory that is happening behind the scale, behind the arpeggio, how to use those things so that way they can practically use them on and off the guitar, which leads me to my big point here. So if you took somebody who didn't know any music theory and you put them in a room of people who are talking about, tonic and dominant and subdominant and half diminished and, minor 7 chords and all these fancy terms, Neapolitan or whatever, and all these things, it literally feels like a second language, right? You need to learn music theory off the fretboard and on the fretboard, okay? You need to learn how music theory works off the fretboard and then apply it on the fretboard, okay? Let's think of it like this. When you were a baby or a toddler or whatever and you were learning how to talk, okay, would you teach a baby how to write their name or write a sentence, or would you teach them how to talk and pronounce the words before they put it on paper, right? Of course you would teach them how to talk first. Music theory is the exact same way, in my opinion. Other people may disagree, but taking these real world examples of so many guitar players who don't really understand what's going on behind the scenes in terms of harmony, diatonic harmony, non-diatonic harmony, chordal structure, how tension and resolution actually works, how to apply cadences, how to use secondary dominance. We have all been programmed just to memorize shapes and just to use tabs, and it is, in my opinion, very counterproductive. Okay, so when you're watching these music theory for guitar videos, in my opinion, especially when you start, you can watch it if you already kind of understand theory and you're like, okay, I want to start putting the pieces together. I understand that. But in my opinion, learn music theory off the fretboard first. Okay, so this is what I would do if I was learning music theory from the ground up. Okay, the first thing that I would do is in my guitar lessons. If I'm, with a guitar teacher, it's really helpful if your guitar teacher does this. Even if I know it's like when you're teaching, kids and teenagers, it's like they have a low attention span. But if you're an adult, you've got no excuse here, right? So the way that I would structure that, okay, is I would get their fingers moving, get their fingers going, but I would also get their brain going and firing up with music theory. And if you teach it the right way and you learn it the right way from a minimalistic approach of just, getting down the circle of fifths, for example, getting the triads down, making sure you understand relative keys really well, seventh chords, diminish, those kinds of things are so critical, and most guitar players actually don't even know it. Going forward with what I would be doing, if I knew zero music theory, it's very, very simple. Learn it off the guitar. Let's take the circle of fifths, for example, okay? The circle of fifths, it's basically this giant circle, okay? It has every major key on the outside of the wheel, and it has every minor key on the inside of the wheel, and those are next to each other or up and down from each other, which show you the relative keys. Pretty much how it works is every time you go up a fifth, starting at C, you add one sharp, or the opposite way, just count up in fourths, you add a flat to the key signature. Okay, it lays out every single key signature of all of the major and minor keys, essentially allowing you to understand every single key. Okay, so by the way, if you need a video on that, I have a really good video that I made a little while ago. Please go click on it. If you need a really good breakdown of the circle of fifths, check that out. If I said, hey, we're in the key of F minor, and I wanted you to tell me what a 4 chord was, snap of a finger, you should be able to say B flat minor. Okay, if I were to say, hey, we're in the key of A major, what's a dominant 7 chord? You're like, boom, E7, E, G sharp, B, and D. Or if I were to say, hey, we're in C minor, we're going to the relative major. What's the relative major? Like, boom, E flat major. That's the level that I think all guitar players should be on who want to shred, who want to play really, really good, master the fretboard, be able to adapt in bands, do whatever they're doing, just sound like a professional musician. That circle of fifths is so critical, okay? What would you give a beginner or an intermediate with to do on the circle of fifths to practice that on the guitar? In my opinion, if you were trying to make them exercises to do with the circle of fifths on the guitar, it is run far away. And this is just, again, my opinion, okay? But you're wasting so much valuable time that you have, which music theory is already complicated enough for beginners. Okay, so get them off the fretboard and get them using their brain to understand, oh, root third fifth, that's how you build a triad. Major triad versus minor triad. Major third on bottom, minor third on top. Reverse that for the minor triad, right? Diminished triad. It's a minor third and then a flatted fifth, right? These are the kinds of things that you want people to be really quick on, because the best part is this, is when you get somebody to really understand music theory off the fretboard, when you give them the guitar, everything just clicks. Everything just clicks. They're like, oh, wait, this is what that triad looks like. Oh, and this is how I connect major and minor. Oh, this is how the modes work. Oh, this is how I can use a major 7 arpeggio into a dominant 7 arpeggio. Or this is how the secondary dominant works. These are all things that are extremely important, and it is very satisfying when you show somebody music theory off the fretboard, and then later on you start kind of throwing them a couple of nudges into doing music theory on the fretboard, and it almost just teaches itself, right? It almost, the student almost just like figures it out, and it all makes sense, and then they get those light bulb moments. So you wonder why most guitar players who don't know music theory, they keep consuming these types of content. This content that's all about music theory for guitar in 10 minutes or something like that, or learn music theory in 1 hour all across the fretboard. And it's like you're trying to teach a toddler how to ride a unicycle when they've never even ridden a tricycle, right? It's just like you're trying to teach someone how to drive stick, for the first time, even though they don't even know what a car is. It's like you got to learn how to take the information and present it to someone. This is, I guess, from more of a teacher perspective, but this is just my opinion for teachers and for students out there who are confused with music theory, because there's so much information out there. Okay, a lot of the information is good. A lot of the information is not good. A lot of the information is good but presented really bad, and a lot of the information that is bad is presented really good, right? So listen, this is just my 2 cents. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. In my opinion, this is the way to do it. Learn music theory off the fretboard for a little bit, and then start to apply it on the fretboard. And as you go, things will start to click and things will start to make sense, instead of having people just mindlessly learn shapes and yada, yada, yada. You got to get people to focus on one thing at a time. So with that being said, I'll see you guys in this next video. Thanks.